words and numbers. But they apply for a job. They go for the job interview. So the mathematician goes in first, and the interviewer says, okay, how much is 500 plus 500? It's 1,000. Get out. Lost the job. Next one, the statistician comes in. How much is 500 plus 500? Says 1,000 with 95% accuracy. Nah, get out. Finally, the accountant comes in. He says, how much is 500 plus 500? And he looks in and he says, how much do you want it to be? Okay. So, there are indications, aside from just the general idea that over thousands of years we'd have a lot of mistakes, there are some indications that there are mistakes in the Torah. The question is, how much? How many, if any? Okay? So the first thing that you can note is that there are actually two Torahs in existence today. Two Torahs that are being used. One of them is the Torah that we're all familiar with. That's used virtually all over the world.
And the other one is Samaritan Torah?
And the other one is what?
The Samaritan Torah?
The Yemenite. The Yemenite Torah. Okay? The Yemenite Torah is identical to ours, but it differs in 9 letters. 9 letters dispersed throughout the 304,805 letters of the Torah. There are 9 letters that are different. Nothing added, nothing subtracted, but 9 letters. Now, how does this come about? It comes about because Hebrew words can be spelled in different ways, all of which might be correct. How does that happen? Okay, well, you've all seen the Hebrew words with the nekudot underneath, the dots that indicate how to pronounce them, right? If you don't know Hebrew well, as I don't know Hebrew well, then if you don't have the dots, you're really a little bit lost in terms of how to pronounce the word. You might recognize the word and then you know how to pronounce it, but if you don't recognize it right offhand and someone says, well, what word is that? You can't pronounce it because there are no pronunciation dots to tell you, right? But those pronunciation dots are a relatively new invention. I'm not sure exactly when they entered the culture, but we're not talking about more than 100 or 200 years.
We know this one.
What, you know that?
Yeah, it started in Tiberias and it started 2,000 years ago.
The dots?
Yeah.
Was it,
Okay, I stand corrected then.
was it 2,000 years ago? I don't
Yeah, that's
remember.
what they said on the thing.
Yeah, I don't remember that one.
However, there's another way of indicating the pronunciation, and that's with letters. Okay, one of them is the aleph versus the ayin. So one of them usually would be pronounced ah, the other one would be an eh, and then there's the vav, which could be either u or o. So if you wanted to indicate that someone was an o, you could either put a dot up there, or you could put the vav, and then you'd have to put a dot either up to indicate o, or in the middle to indicate u. So those are some of the things. So you can spell a word with those, and it's called, in Hebrew, it's called malay and chaser, which means full and defective. But defective doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with it. It's still correct. That's just what they call it. It means without the extra letters, and full means full with the extra letters. And you can have a word that has 2 vowels, and it might be partially defective and partially full. In one case you put in the vowel letter, in the other case you don't. Okay? So that's where you can introduce errors in the Torah. Now, they're not going to make any difference in terms of what the word means, but in terms of the spelling, it's going to make a difference. And where that could make a big difference is in the Torah codes. Okay? We'll see in a few moments. But this, where a lot of this has come about by the critics of the Torah codes, who said, well, we all know, and I'll tell you why. We're going through the reasons right now. So far, we only have like 9 letters, but we'll see there could be many more. You know, we all know there are thousands of letters different in the Torah than it was before, so these codes couldn't be. You claim there's codes, there's no way it could be. Even if there were codes in the original Torah, they would have been destroyed by all the errors that are in the Torah today. Okay? So that's where a lot of this has come from, and we'll deal with the logic of this claim. A more serious claim, not a claim but a fact, is that the Torah, the Talmud in Masechta Kedushin 30a, there's a statement that says that the scholars at that time were no longer experts on the Mali and Chaser. So if they're no longer experts on which words are spelled with the vowelization and without the vowelization, you've got an even bigger chance that errors are going to occur. Because they wouldn't spot an error. And by the way, note that, when some people will say, well, the Torah's got to be absolutely accurate. How many of you have ever been in a synagogue when they were reading the Torah? None of you?
When they what
Right.
Torah?
Either in a synagogue
When they're
or in
reading
Beis
the Torah.
Medrash here,
Oh, yeah.
when they're reading the Torah
Yeah.
on a Shabbat or on Monday or Thursday, right? Now, you probably noticed if the person reading it mispronounces a word, okay, or says the wrong word or something like that, everyone is going to say, wait, stop, go back, read the word, you missed the word, you mispronounced the word, right? Have you ever seen that? Some of you probably have.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, so you see, it's gotta be 100% accurate, because if it wasn't accurate, they would know right away. They say, hey, and you say, yeah, but that's what it says. Oh, no, that's wrong. But you see, where the problem with Bali and Chazer is that the words sound the same. So if it was spelled wrong in the Torah and a person is learning it, it would sound perfectly legitimate, because it is, and no one would spot the error. So it would get through. That's a problem. It could be a problem. It's a potential problem. An even bigger problem is that there are some Torahs, manuscripts in the Torah, that are quite ancient. Some of them date back to the 13th century, some to the 3rd century. They're really old, right? We're talking about hundreds and hundreds of years old. Some of them, I think there's one that's more than a couple of thousand years old, whatever. And they're not the same. In fact, the Leningrad Codex, which, as you might expect, is somewhere in some museum in Leningrad, in Russia, has hundreds of letters different from the Torah we have today. We'll come to that later. But this is a serious issue, right? You have a lot of old Torahs, and ours is not the same as any of them. In fact, none of them are exactly the same. Obviously, there's got to be a lot of errors in there. And finally, a really serious issue is that in the Talmud, again, going back to the same place as before, the Talmud in Kedushin, 30a, there is a large vav, an extra large vav in the word gacham. It's found in Leviticus 11:42, and the Talmud states that vav is the middle of the Torah in letters. That's the middle of the Torah. The problem is, it's not the middle of the Torah. In fact, it's 4,829 letters away from the center of the Torah that we have today. Now, you think about it a little bit, you'll note that for every 2 letters that you move, that you delete or add 2 letters, the middle moves 1. So this is implying that you've got over 9,000 letters either added to one side of the Torah or subtracted to one side of the Torah. That's a serious issue. That says this is the middle, it's not the middle. Okay. So that's what we're going to have to deal with. Okay, so let's deal with them one by one. Okay, the first thing was the Yemenite Torah and the Torah we have today differ by 9 letters. The fact of the matter is that there are 304,805 letters in the Torah, which means that it's 99.997% accurate. 9 letters in the Torah, it's not going to destroy the codes, for sure. It will certainly destroy some of them, but not all of them, and we'll get into more detail on that a little bit later. So the 9 errors is not a big issue. With 9 errors, don't worry about it. Okay? And again, the 9 letters are just Bali and Chaser. So the words are identical, the meanings are identical, there's no mitzvahs that are missing or gained or anything like that, just a different correct spelling of a word. Okay, second issue. The scholars in Babylonia were no longer experts and had the Bali and Chaser. So if they weren't experts, they didn't know if there were errors or not. However, logically, the fact that they were not experts does not imply that there were a lot of errors. What it does imply is that there was a doubt. In other words, if there were errors, they would not know about it, but that doesn't prove there were errors. A very important point. Okay? Just because someone doesn't know something doesn't mean that it's the other way. You don't know. However, there are 2 traditions in terms of our Torah, how our Torah came to be where it is right today. One of them is the Babylonian tradition, the other one is the Tiberian tradition. The Torah we have today comes down to us from the Tiberian tradition in Eretz Yisrael. In Babylonia, they may have had a doubt. That does not imply that in Israel they had a doubt. So even though they had a doubt in terms of how to spell the words, the scholars over here may not have had any doubt at all. And our tradition, the Torah we have today, comes from the Tiberian tradition, not from the Babylonian tradition. So that, therefore, that statement that they were not experts is totally irrelevant to the whole discussion. Okay, everyone with me? Okay. Number 3. Ancient manuscripts are different by hundreds of letters in some cases from the Torah we have today. That's a serious issue, potentially. But, you see, that's only true for the Ashkenazi Torah, the one that we're familiar with. The Yemenite Torah is identical to all the manuscripts that go back thousands of years. So therefore, if you're talking about hundreds of letters and everything like that, that's only for our Torah. In terms of the Yemenite Torah, it's exactly the same. And our Torah is only 9 letters off from the Yemenite Torah, which means that even though ours was copied many times, there were many copies that were wrong, nevertheless, the Torah that somehow, and we'll talk about this in a minute, somehow we ended up with today is very accurate, in spite of all the differences in those ancient manuscripts. So now let me explain why that would be true. In other words, here you have the Yemenite Torah. Okay, it's only 9 letters, at most 9 letters error, perhaps. But our Torah, I mean, if there are copies that were hundreds of letters off, I mean, how can our Torah be more accurate than all of these manuscripts? And the answer is that there were many, in the villages, in the towns of yore, going back many years, they had 2 different kinds of Torah. They would usually have one Torah, which they kept in one place. They never learned from it, they didn't use it, it was kept separate. This was supposed to be as accurate as could be. They got it from somewhere else where it was copied and checked and checked and checked. Then there would be people who would come to the synagogue where this was kept. They would copy it over to individual Sefer Torahs, and then they would go ahead and bring it to other communities around there. Okay? So what's happening is that just because these scribes made a lot of errors does not necessarily imply that the Torah that was kept to be copied had a lot of errors. Okay. Now we want to discuss the eclectic process. Very, very simple concept. I wonder if any of these work. Let's give it a try. Okay. Oh, good. Here I have some text. A, B, C, D, E, okay? And I have another copy of the same text, and it reads A, Q, C, D, E, right? Now I don't know which one is right. It's supposed to be the same text. Obviously, one of them is wrong, right? And I have a third text. A, B, C, D, E. Now the question is, what do you think this letter is likely to be?
B.
It's likely to be B. And if you take into account the fact that these come from very widely dispersed geographic areas in the past, not today. Today the whole world is like one, and people go back and forth all the time. But back in ancient times, if you took something that was in Europe and you went to Iraq, for example, or Persia at that time, there was almost no traffic back and forth. So if you get a text from one geographic location, another one of the Torah from a totally different geographic location, and yet another one from a different geographic location, and you do this, you take a majority vote, you are almost surely going to end up with a very accurate Torah. Especially considering that the errors would be errors in individual errors, not inserting a whole piece of text, and they would be dispersed in different places. It's random. When a person makes a mistake, it could be here, it could be here. He's not purposely making a mistake in one particular place. So the fact that 2 mistakes might end up in the same place is highly unlikely. This process was actually done on the Ashkenazi Torah, and the last time it was done was by the Ramah or Rabbi Meir Halevi Abu Afia in the 13th century. And the Torah we have today is the Ramah's Torah, which is different than all those others, because it's gone through this eclectic process. So there's good reason to believe that our Torah could be very, very accurate, in spite of the fact that there are ancient manuscripts that differ in many, many letters. And one thing that I would point out, very important, that among all these Torahs that differ sometimes in just a few letters, sometimes the letter code it's 200 letters, more I think, the words are all the same. There's not a single word in any one of them that's not in all the others, or vice versa. The words are totally intact. We're talking about single letter differences, dispersed randomly throughout. Okay, let's come to the question about the middle of the Torah. Now, this raises an interesting issue, and that is, you have 14,829 letters that are off, the center is supposedly off, which means 9,000 letters, about 9,600 letters, are different. Now, here's the Torah, goes from here to here, and here's the center, okay? Now, how do you get to be the center to be 9,000 letters off, or 4,000 letters off, and 9,000? It means you have to insert either 9,000 letters here, or take away 9,000 letters on one side, right? That's the way you move the center. How likely is something like that to happen? If you have dispersed letters, just errors here and there, why would the number that end up on one side be 9,000 more than end up on the other side? And it's extremely unlikely, and therefore we can rule it out immediately. If you talk about pieces of text being added to it, maybe a chunk of text was put in here that wasn't there before, or taken out that was there before, the fact of the matter is that also cannot be. Because it turns out that the Samaritan version of our Torah, which is hundreds of years before the Common Era, the Talmud is about 500 years in the Common Era, so we're talking about, at least 150, maybe 200 or 350 years. They agree 98%, and the differences are dispersed. So therefore, to say that somehow a bulk chunk of text got inserted or deleted from the Torah on one side, that's what's causing the center to move, doesn't hold. Because then you have to see that the Samaritan Torah too, if you don't. The same thing is true for the Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Torah, which is the 3rd century before the Common Era. So here we're talking about a minimum of 450 years, okay? And the same thing is true over there, that it's of course translated into Greek, but if there was a big chunk of text missing or added, you'd see the difference. You'd see in the translation, you'd say, hey, this doesn't occur in the Torah, or hey, where's the story? You don't see that. So therefore, somehow it seems highly unlikely that you could have lost or gained 9,000 letters. The question is, the Talmud says the middle is here, and it's not. How do we understand that? The true answer to that question is nobody really knows. People have come up with explanations. I've seen several of them. I'll give you the explanation that I think fits the best. There is a Rabbi Yitzhak Zilber. I don't know how many of you have heard of him. He was a Soviet mathematician and a reviewsnik during the Soviet era. Lived from 1917 to 2003. He wrote a book called To Remain a Jew, which is very, very well worth reading. Not only worth it, but it's also very entertaining. It's very, very interesting. Anyone using a cell phone, I would appreciate very much if you would either leave to use your cell phone or put it away. It's really very disturbing to be giving a talk and someone's using their cell phone.
It's talking to you.
Thank you. You can leave if you like and then use the cell phone, that's fine. But I prefer you don't use it while I'm talking. Thank you. The thing about Rabbi Zilber is that his father was a rabbi in Kazan, Russia. He was arrested after World War II because he was teaching Torah to people. He was a refusenik. He was sent to slave labor in Siberia And throughout several years, he was there in slave labor for, let's see, a good many years. Released in 1958 after Stalin's death. So if he was put there after World War II, 45, he could have been in there for 10 to 13 years maybe, something like that. During that entire time in a slave labor camp in the Gulag, the Russian Gulag in Siberia, not once did he eat anything that was not kosher, and not once did he do anything on Shabbat that he wasn't supposed to do. He kept Shabbat. It was amazing. You read the story, it's amazing like how he did it, but he did. He was released, as I said, in 1958, but the KGB continued to harass him, and finally he caused them so much trouble that they threw him out, which was very happy for him. And he came to Israel, he immigrated to Israel in 1972, and he had a trip. He had learned a tremendous amount all on his own. He had a trip to the United States, at which time he had a chance to meet Rabbi Moshe Feinstein. How many of you have heard of him? He was one of the greatest rabbis of the previous generation. He spent about an hour with him, and Rabbi Feinstein gave him smicha, made him a rabbi. That's how impressed he was with how much he knew. Here in Israel, he started a Baal Tshuva movement for Russians, established a whole bunch of schools. This is the answer that he gives. You see, the vav that occurs right over here is extra large. It should be only this large, but it's much bigger. And if you look throughout the Torah, you will find a number of letters that are either extra large or extra small. Okay? Now, the Torah that we have today has 16 of them, and this vav is number 9. So, what he's suggesting is that the vav, what?
What do you mean that's number 9?
In other words, if you start counting the letters as you go along reading the Torah, which ones are either extra big or extra small, the 9th one is going to be this vav, this big vav.
Okay.
Okay? Now, what he's claiming is, what he's suggesting is rather, is that what it's saying is not that this vav is the center of the Torah, of all the letters of the Torah. It's the center of all the unusual sized letters. Now, think about it. 16 is an even number, so there is no center. If you're going to be close to the center, right, 16, you have to have an odd number, right? Think of 3, 1, 2, 3, right? Then 2 is the center. But 1, 2, 3, 4, there is no center. It's somewhere between 2 and 3, but there is nothing there, okay? What he's suggesting is that the center would be either right before the big vav or the one right after the big vav, as close to the center as you could possibly be, one or the other. Now, what makes it really interesting is that there is another tradition, which is not our Torah, but in the Machzor Vitri, it claims that there are 32 extra-sized letters, but that this vav is number 16. Now, think about it. The Talmud is asking a question about this when it mentions vav as the center. It says, is it the center of the first half of all the letters or the second half of all the letters? Now think about it. The number of letters in the Torah is odd, 304,805. There is a true center. So it's not in the first half or the second half, it's in the middle. But if you're talking about the oversized letters or the undersized letters, you know, the combination of different sized letters, then number 9 is as close you can go, as close as you can get to the middle. But it's in the second half, right? It's over here. Whereas the 16 would be over here.
What about number 8?
What?
What about number 8? It's just as close, no?
Number 8?
1 through
Right,
8
right.
and 9 through 16. So 8 and 9 would both be just as close in the middle.
No. Yes, that's right. But the thing is that what the question Talmud is asking is it in the first half or the second half? 9 and 16 are in different parts. What the Talmud is really asking is which of these two traditions is the correct one? Is it in the first half or in the second half? Do you see what's going on?
What does the letter 9 be in the second half? 1 through 8?
Yeah, but then
9
16
is
had a
the-
13
9 is
wrong
the
verse.
second
6 is the
half.
first half, 9 is the
Yeah.
second half.
Yeah, 9 is in the second half, I think,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And the 16 would be in the first half. So it fits very, very nicely. So that's his explanation of, so that when it says that this is the center of the Torah, it's not talking about the center of all the letters, it's talking about the center of the letters, but the letters it's talking about is the different size letters, the ones that are either too big or too small. So we do have an explanation which rings true over here. We can't know for sure it's right. There are other explanations, but to me, this seems like the best one. It fits, especially given the question, is it in the first half or the second half, which if this really is, you're talking about which letter is in the center, it makes no sense to ask such a question at all. There is no first half or second half. I mean, there is, but the center is not in either one of them, it's in the center. Because with an odd number, you have a center. With even number, you don't. Okay, who can tell me what's the difference between an American actuary and a Sicilian actuary? No one knows. You know what an actuary is? Oh, an actuary.
Actually,
Yeah, tell us, what's an actuary?
he does like, well, I don't know the exact definition, but he works with intense numbers, with insurance mainly.
Correct. What it does is when for an insurance company, when an insurance company wants to charge you insurance, right? Let's say you take out life insurance or you take out car insurance, right? So they're going to consult an actuary. He's going to look at all the statistics and he's going to figure out what's the probability of you being in an accident. The probability is going to be higher if you're a teenager than if you're an older person. It's get higher again if you get too old, that kind of thing. And similarly with life insurance, the older you get, the more it's going to cost you because the odds of you dying is higher as you get older and older. So now the question is, what's the difference between an American actuary and a Sicilian actuary? The answer is, both of them are going to tell you approximately how many people are going to die next year. But the Sicilian actuary won't give you the names. Okay. So here's an incredible study that was done by a Dr. Mordecai Breuer in 1976. He published his work in a document called the Aleppo Codex and the Accepted Text of the Torah, published by Mosad Harav Kook. First of all, the Aleppo Codex, it was written in Tiberias in the 10th century of the Common Era. It was endorsed as being the most accurate version of the Torah by Maimonides himself. That was his Torah that he used in the 13th century. It was eventually brought from, I guess, Cairo, where the Rambam was, where Maimonides was brought to Aleppo, Syria, that gives it its name, in 1375. And it remained there until 1947. In 1947, the Arabs rioted in Aleppo, and they burned down the synagogue. And when they were looking for the codex afterward, it was gone. And for the longest time, no one knew what happened to it. Eventually, in 1958, it was smuggled into Israel by a Syrian Jew by the name of, what was his name? Murad Faham. Turns out it was burned, almost completely. But there are a few pages at the end that were not burned. So that's the only thing we have from the Aleppo Codex, except for one thing. And it was presented, by the way, to the President of Israel, Yitzhak Ben-Zvi. Now, one thing that came along with many, you don't see it in our Torahs today, but with many of the old Torahs, they had a Masoretic note. Now, how many of you have looked at a art scroll, Chumash, right? Ever noticed that at the end of the Parsha, it says, according to the Masoretic note, something, something? These Masoretic notes were actually not just a little note at the end of the Parsha. It was something that accompanied the text. I don't know if it was written in the Torah or was a supplement that was kept with the Torah, but it was a commentary on the entire Torah, a commentary in terms of its orthography, the spelling of words and so forth and so on. And although the great majority of the Aleppo Codex did not survive, its Masoretic notes did. Important point. Okay, so what Breuer did is he decided he was going to do this eclectic process himself. It hasn't been done since the 13th century, but he's going to do it now. And what he does is he gets actually 4 manuscripts in one printed edition. The first manuscript is called Manuscript Sassoon, 1053. It was written before the 10th century the Common Era, so it predates the Ramah quite a bit. And the Masoretic notes that are with it come from the Aleppo Codex. It was copied verbatim. That's how it survived. It was copied over, they were destroyed probably with most of the Torah itself, but it survived in this manuscript Sassoon, and Masoretic notes. The second one was also manuscript Sassoon. By the way, Sassoon was one of the wealthiest people in Iraq, I think it was. Eventually went to Bombay, built up a huge financial empire. It rivaled the Rothschilds. And in fact, a few generations later, one of them moved to London. He was knighted, became a serf, because you had that kind of money, you could get anything you want. And one of them married a Rothschild daughter. They married two wealthiest, the wealthiest in the Western world, the wealthiest from the Eastern world. Anyway, so manuscript Sassoon 507, it's been renamed manuscript Hebrew 24.5702. That dates back to between the 9th and the 10th century. Third one was the manuscript British Museum, OR 4445. By the way, I'm giving you this just in case you take notes, but I want you to also know that, I'm giving you the exact information. If you're interested in the details and all the exact information, again, it's in my book. And plus much more than I'm giving you tonight. Okay, so, okay. And then the fourth is the lettergraph codex that we talked about before. It differs in letters by more than 200 from the Torah we have today. That dates back to the 11th century of the Common Era. And finally, the printed edition is a Mikra Gedolot, which goes back, it was printed in Venice in 1525. So that's pretty old too. And he does what's called, he has 5 texts, not 3, and he's doing what's called the supermajority, looking for 4 against 1, which would be much better than even doing this, which is very good. So, okay. What he found was that he was able to determine all the letters of the Torah, 304,805 of them, exactly, with the exception of 20. There were 20 letters that were still in doubt. Okay, which means right away that he's got the Torah 99.993% accurate. Okay? What he then did was he now used the Masoretic notes, because sometimes the Masoretic notes would say this word is spelled mole or chaser, full or not full. And that way you can determine what the spelling should be regardless of what you actually see the spelling. And with that, there were only 6. He used not only the Aleppo Masoretic notes, but also 4 others. One from the Sephardic Torah, the one from the Yemenite Torah, and the Cairo Codex. Plus those 4, the 4 of the manuscripts that he has, plus the Sephardic, plus the Yemenite, plus the Cairo Codex. And at the end, there were only 6 letters that were in doubt. Out of the entire Torah, only 6 letters. And what he had outside of those 6 letters was precisely, letter for letter, the Yemenite Torah. Exactly. Aside from the 6 letters. Outside of those 6 letters, the Yemenite Torah. Now, if we did a 3 to 2 majority, that's not a super majority, it's 3 to 2, then he ends up with the Torah, in which he gets, on those 6 letters only, 3 of them agree with the Ashkenazic Torah, and 6 differ from the Yemenite Torah. So what that tells us basically is that there are 12 places, if you look at compare all the places where they differ, there are 12 places where the Ashkenazi, the Yemenite, and the Breuer Torah are not all the same. Which means that you probably have at most 12 letters that are wrong in the Torah. Doesn't mean there are 12 letters, it means that there are at most 12 letters. Now what I just said would seem to indicate that the Yemenite Torah is the most accurate one, which sort of makes sense, right? Because not only did he end up with the Yemenite Torah, but remember we said before that the Yemenite Torah today is exactly the same as it was thousands of years ago. They have ancient manuscripts that are 1,000 to 2,000 years old, exactly the same, letter for letter. So it would seem the Yemenite Torah is the most accurate. The Torah we have today that we're using, the Ashkenazic Torah, is the one that's probably got 9 letters off, okay, rather than 12. 12 was the limit. Another interesting point here, there was a paper that was published by some Israeli researchers called From Damage to Discovery by Virtual Unwrapping, Reading the Scroll from Ein Gedi by Seals et al. Dated September 21st, 2016. What happened was that a scroll, there was apparently a village, an ancient village in Ein Gedi. It was attacked, it was burned to the ground, including the synagogue and including the Torah scroll. Right? So that's the Ein Gedi scroll. It was burned completely, it was a charred thing. It was so fragile that if you touched it, it just started crumbling. And so they put it into a box when they discovered it. I think that was, I don't know when that was. Let's see. I don't have it down. Oh, yeah. Well, yeah, it was, no. The paper was published in 2016. I'm not quite sure. It's dated, oh, yeah, it was discovered in 1970. Okay. They figured that the fire probably took place about 600 CE. What they do is they put it in a hermetically sealed box so that nothing should destroy it, and vacuumed it, and the whole works. They put it into a museum somewhere, and that's where it stayed until 2016, when these researchers realized something very, very interesting. And that is that the ink that was used for this Sefer Torah, you couldn't unwrap it, it was all rolled up into just a big charred thing. The ink had iron in it. The formula for making that ink, one of the components of it was iron. And so if you x-rayed it, like an x-ray, regular x-ray, the x-ray would be blocked by all the letters. Okay? But it would go through the parchment. So you get an image of the letters, except that they would all be on top of each other because it's all rolled up. And that's why the title is Virtual Unwrapping. What they did was they put it into a computer, they put in a computer program that was able to virtually unwrap this burned Torah without touching it and reconstruct what was there. What they had was only what they could read, because some of it was totally destroyed. What they could read was 35 letters, 35 lines. Okay, so we're talking about 1,200 letters from the middle of Vayikra, Leviticus. It turned out to be 100% identical to the Leviticus we have today. Okay, so in other words, that's another indication that what we have is very accurate. It's not a proof, but it's another indication. Now, how many of you were at my codes class that I gave 2 times ago? Okay, good. So you remember the Bin Laden code, right? That was very long, 29 letters long. It spans some 60%. I should have it written down here. I don't have it written down. Okay, I thought I had it written down. 60% of the Torah. Yeah, 60.6. Sorry, I got the decimal. 60.6% of the Torah from the first letter of the whole phrase to the end. Now, clearly, you take out a letter from anywhere inside that 60% and you destroy that code. If you put a letter in, you destroy that code. Unless you put in between 2 of the letters of the code, you put a letter in and take a letter out, the code will survive. The question is, how many errors can that code tolerate and still be found? And I did that experiment. I took the Torah, as it is on computer disk, and I randomly inserted 1 letter, 2 letters, 3 letters, and see how many. I did it tens of thousands of times, and see how often does the code survive. I look for the code in the new corrupted text and see if it's there. And it turns out that the probability is less than 1 in 100 that it would survive if there were 6 letters changed. It's less than 1 in 1,000 if there are 9 letters changed. Which would indicate that our Torah is 99.996% accurate. In terms of what we said before, of changing a letter, looking at the manuscripts, or in terms of adding and subtracting, it's 99.997% accurate, with a maximum of 9 letters or 12 letters being corrupted. But remember that all the words are accurate. In all manuscripts, not a single word was different. It was only the Mole of the Passer, how to spell it. So our conclusion is that the Torah is extremely, extremely accurate. At most, something like 12 letters, possibly. At most. More likely less than that. Now, here's an interesting thing, which if you quote me on it and someone comes back and said, "Please, if you put it in writing, I'm going to say I never said that." You know? Okay? But just between us, it's a small group.
You are being
The
recorded.
question is, I'm being recorded, so I won't say anything. Turn off the recorders.
Do you mean stop it?
Turn off the
Oh, yeah.
recorder.